This is the Perfect RIA, in case you didn't know. Bringing you all the strategies to help your business grow. Are you happy? Are you satisfied? Are you hanging on the edge of your seat? Sit back and listen in while you feel the beat, yeah!
Welcome back to another amazing episode of the Perfect RIA. I'm your host, Micah, and with me, as usual, the legendary Matthew Jarvis. What's going on, bud?
Micah, here we are in the middle of the year, middle of July or early July, and it's always a good time to reflect back and say, hey, half of this year is behind us, right? Half of the year is gone, but I still have the second half of the year, and it's a time where I try to step back, really look at my numbers and say, all right, what have I actually accomplished this year? Where have I been kidding myself? And again, what do I need to do to take the rest of this year to the next level?
Well, Jarvis, this is where we've been telling all of our Invictus members, all of our members, right? This is the time to do a mid-year review. And when I was talking to them in the May time period, I was like, hey, book it on your calendar. When is your mid-year review? I like mine in July for what you just said. I got 2 months behind me, right? And we walked through a whole process about how do you do a proper mid-year review? Because I got 6 months in front of me and I can still make changes to some things that I need to do going forward. And as we were kind of looking at this in kind of the aspect of getting ready for the mid-year review, this conversation came up between us about the illusion of this 10x or the myth of this 10x. Right now I'm going to say we're totally guilty of this because you can go back and listen to our previous podcast. Talking about 10x is better than 2x, and I'm pretty sure I have it on my it's right there on my bookshelf.
Yeah, great book.
The book 10x is easier than 2x, right? But the reality with it is, if that was the case, if it really was easier, wouldn't there be more companies that have 10x than 2x?
Yeah, this is a great question. And again, I love the book and I like the framework. And I think it's a very positive mantra, right? You and I are all about abundance mantra. Yeah. So it's a great mantra. But sometimes we stop doing the 2x work. So you and I have successfully doubled a lot of practices, Invictus members practices, our peer group practices, our own practices. We can usually, again, let's take established practices, not a practice that did $1 last year and $10 this year. I don't count that. But established practices, we can pretty consistently double the net pay inside of a 3-year window. We're pretty good at that. I have not ever seen a practice 10x in a 3-year window. Again, an established practice. We're not talking about going from $10,000 of revenue to $100,000 in revenue. I don't really count that. That's great, but I don't really count that.
But that is work, right? I don't want to disparage that, right? That's starting up work right there. It really is great that you put that effort into it and go, but it is a different lens, or maybe there's someone who's figured this out that wants to challenge us on it. I would love that, by the way.
Please.
But maybe there's a different lens on it. However, but going from that 10,000 income to 100,000, right? Or that 25,000 income to $250,000, yes, that is technically a 10x growth that you have. But then going from 250 to 2.5 million, okay, that's doable, right? Have done that.
Yep.
But that's still work that's there. But now going from 1 million to 10 million in revenue, or 750,000 to 7.5 million in revenue, it is different work. And I don't necessarily think it's easier than 2x.
Yeah, especially if we're measuring the bottom line number. So someone will certainly call, and I know some of these people in industry, and they'll say, hey, we went from 100 million to $1 billion. We went from $1 billion to 10 billion. But then when you peel back the layers and you look at bottom line numbers, and you say, well, you went from $1 billion to 10 billion, but you're not making any more money. I don't know that I count that. Like, we can shuffle the deck chairs. But either way, Micah, whether you're aiming for 1x, 10x, 5x, whatever number you're aiming for, what tends to happen, especially in a very structured practice like we help advisors build, is that you've got your surge cycles, you have your value adds, and it's easy to just fall in that routine and just do the same thing again and again and never step back and say, wait a second, why are we doing it this way? Wait a second, like, these things are starting to fall off the rails, but we're in such a pattern we don't notice it.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question to ask with that right now. I think one of the things that happens, and I'm going to put this in a playing office category as well, Jarvis, that comes up too, is we get so caught up in saying, hey, what's the hack for this? What's the 10x for this? What's the other thing for this? And we're not actually taking the time just to friggin' work. Now, delegation's an easy example of this, right? Huge delegation fan, right? You should be delegating out a lot of stuff that's there. However, one basic rule in delegation that sometimes we miss is I always tell people, do not delegate a task that would take you longer to delegate it than it would to do it. just go do the bloody task, right? Just go do the work. Now, that's not repetitive tasks, right? Okay, I booked this one appointment. It's quicker for me to book it than my team. Okay, but now every appointment going forward, I still have to book. Okay, that's not faster for my team to do it than for me to do it. It makes more sense for me to delegate that repetitive task that has to get done. But if something's a one-off, me to create the rules for delegation, to send that off to get it done. And I run into this a lot with my personal assistant, right? It was saying, hey, go look into these things. And I'm like, you know what? I just should have made the phone call first because I would have got all of the information out that I needed to before I could set a system up for that delegation process. And I think this 2X and 10X comes into that category at the same time. We get so excited about looking for a hack. We get so excited about looking for the easy button. And we don't just say, hey, roll up our sleeves and now's the time to work.
Yeah, that's a great point. I started rereading Zig Ziglar's book, See You at the Top, which is a classic book. And he talks a lot about those kinds of things. As far as just like the things that always worked, always work. And anytime we think we've found a shortcut, we probably haven't. Again, that doesn't mean don't delegate, and it doesn't mean don't automate and eliminate, but you've got to kind of go back to those fundamentals, and you've really got to carve out that time each week as a fundamental and say, hey, I'm going to spend this intentional period of time, this hour block, this 2 hour block to sit back. And I know it's a cliche to say work on your business, but to really say, hey, today every week I'm going to spend an hour figuring out something I can eliminate from my practice, something I can automate from my practice, something I can delegate if it cannot be eliminated or automated.
Sure, but give it a place to live.
Give it a place to live, yeah.
And then same thing with your 2X work about saying, no, this needs to give it a place to live. That's just rolling up your sleeves and getting dirty and making sure you can get your work done. Now, on the automate thing, one of the things, Jarvis, that I love to do is kind of once a quarter is pick something my team is doing and go through that process with them. Because a lot of times now, again, I want to encourage the behavior that I want to keep going. If I delegate something to my team and they end up just getting it done, even though it wasn't the most efficient manner possible, I am very elated that they got it done. Right? Great news. You got the task done. That's what I want to see. I want to be able to delegate a task and I want you to successfully complete them. So I'm not going to berate them for not seeing the most efficient way to do that. I'm going to celebrate the fact that they got it done. Then I'm going to come back and say, hey, do you think there's any way that we could modify this, tweak this, and save your time? Right? Again, I'm not punishing them for doing it inefficiently. They got the work done, and that's the number one thing I was solving for. Now I want to go back to them and say, how do we streamline this? Because the way my mind works and processes and operations and systems is different than my team's mindset. They're like, hey, A to B to C to D to E to F. And I'm like, hey, why don't you just go to A to F? Like all those other steps, I don't really see why you're even doing them. So it's a different lens that we can work through to automate things for our team. But that's a once a quarter thing that I need to look at. That's not an everyday thing.
Yeah, Micah, a great hack on that, because I often meet advisors who almost sit around and dream that processes will appear in their office. So they'll say, hey, I should have some more processes. Yeah, you've been telling me that for a year now, and you've not made any progress on that. So a way to make progress on this, and for our Invictus members, feel free to reach out to the team and they'll get you connected with our process writer. But a way to do that, have your team do a Zoom recording of them going through this process, changing a client's address, whatever it is, and have them just speak stream of consciousness. So a Zoom meeting by themselves, record it stream of consciousness, the whole process through, and then send it to a process writer. And again, for our Invictus members, we'd be glad to tell you who our process writer is, and then have them write that process. This will force a couple of things. One, it's going to really force your team to streamline because they're going to be like, oh man, somebody's watching this. But then you have a written process that you can go back and look, Micah, to your point, oh, A, B, C, D, E, F. Wait a second, what if we skip C and D? But now you're looking at a written process, which somehow gives it more formality. And you can say, hey, what if we skip this step? What if we only did this on Wednesdays instead of just haphazardly? These are, again, things you can do. This is in that intentional work on my business. I'm going to go back. I'm going to look at that process that the process writer wrote, and I'm going to see, hey, how can we improve this process?
You know, Jarvis, the other thing that I hear from advisors, they're like, hey, well, I don't have a process. Micah, can I see yours? I'm like, sure. Here's my process. They're like, oh, well, that won't work for our office. I'm like, then why did you ask for it? And so now they're going to scrap this entire thing versus tweaking one or two things. We go through it. It's like, all right, well, it won't work. Well, this step right here. Okay, so you're going to throw the whole thing out because one step you don't think is efficient. Now, let's step aside. This is coming from an office that's actually using it. You're not using any systems and processes. We are, and it does work. Let's put that one aside. Don't throw out the entire system. Change the one thing. Or operate the system, have your team run it 3 times, and then hit the pause button. Say, hey, what do we like? What do we need to tweak? What do we need to make changes? Every office is going to be slightly different. The concept of the process is the same. It's the little details that you got to say what's best for your team.
Yeah, we ran into this in my team, and I feel like we do a pretty good job on our team when we started using the same CRM that you use, Micah, that you built out, and that we're on that same Infinity platform. The team would say, you know what, on this drop-down box, it says Schwab IRA instead of Fidelity IRA. And so I think we really got to stop right here. But it still says IRA. Could we just go that it says IRA? Like, well, I guess we could. Then let's do that. Well, won't someone think it's a Schwab account? Well, we have 0 Schwab accounts. 0. So I don't think anyone's going to think that it was actually a Schwab account. But team members and all of us, we get hung up on like this littlest thing. Well, you know, my logo is a different size, and therefore this newsletter template. Hey, if you're looking for a reason for it not to work, you're always going to find it. I always tell my kids, are we looking for problems or solutions? It is such a shortcut. It is such an advantage to be able to get someone else's process, like we make available for Invictus members, and implement that versus drawing from scratch. But you have to understand, at best, it'll be 90% applicable, maybe 95. There's going to be things that don't fit.
Yes. Yeah, amen. Just like all things, right? But again, this goes back to it. Okay, are we looking for a hack, a magic pill, a magic wand that's going to wave and fix all of our problems, right? If I found the right process, if I spend enough time looking for the right process and I finally find it, it's going to solve all my problems. Or do I just take one that does 82% of what I need, run with it, and then tweak it as needed, right? And that's the 2X concept in my mind about saying, hey, we just need to work and grind this thing out. And by implementing those processes, you're going to see dramatic growth in your practice, in your team, etc. But it takes work, and it takes work from the top down to do these things.
Micah, something I want to highlight on this too, and I will reference an example that you shared with me years ago, but on this eliminate step. So you and I are incredible fans of forcing mechanisms. And when we see a process that's repeatedly not working or being done inefficiently, we need to find a way to force that to work. An example that you shared with me, and I apologize if I get the details wrong, is that years ago you were converting your office from paper files to digital files. Now, for our younger listeners, this will be like a foreign concept, right? They're like, what is a paper file? And I feel old just mentioning this, but we used to do everything on paper, and you would keep all of these records, and you would keep physical copies of every application, and every dictation would be a physical copy. And your office, like many of our offices, converted over to digital, but there was some foot dragging, if you will, right? There was some like, well, next week. But when did it finally switch over?
Well, it finally switched over. I got to, now I'm not recommending this as the solution, by the way, for people to do, but it kind of switched over when I went in there and I eliminated all paper files. And I said, great news is they were all scanned and whatnot. We 86'd all the paper files. We got rid of the copying machine that was there. So all you had was a printer and a scanner. Yes, you can still make copies with that, right? But that's all that we had was a printer and a scanner. We got rid of these other things, rid of the paper files. We did one switch over in a weekend because I just got tired of it. That created a bit of turmoil. Again, I didn't really get consensus in this, so there was a price to pay, but immediately we were all on digital files. I did the same thing when we were switching programs and platforms. Great news. On Friday, we left, it was one. Monday, we came in, it was the new one. And everyone gets switched over in one foul swoop because we're not going to debate this for 17 days, 17 weeks, whatever that time period is. Yeah, changing a system kind of sucks. It does, right? There's always going to be bumps along. There's always going to be problems. But if we drag this thing out, that's just playing office. So we got to be a little bit more sometimes dramatic with these things and just step in and says, nope, this is the way it is going forward. Here it is. And we move on.
Yeah, other examples of that come to mind would be scheduling. So we had issues with scheduling years ago where things would get scheduled on the wrong times during surge meetings. And so we said, great, all meetings will be scheduled through Calendly, end of story, no exceptions. Well, what if a client calls in? Cool, then open up Calendly on your computer and click the button. And so that's again in that intentional time. You say, all right, where's there a system that's not working the way that I want it to be? And how do I eliminate the other options, right? How do I get away from those? And if you draw a blank on them, you say, oh, my team does this thing, or I do this thing, and I can't figure out how to get around it. Extreme accountability works perfect. That's what we do in every mastermind with our Invictus members. We say, hey, there's this thing that you know you need to change, and you haven't ever changed it, and we're going to help you change it, right? We're going to set some line in place that is so dramatic, there's such a dramatic consequence that you're going to get this changed. And it's got a pretty consistent track record, Micah.
It is. It works really good, right? And these aren't things that people they are things that people don't want to do, but they're always the things that people know they need to do. And it's that nagging thing that's holding them back. Now, again, this isn't a magic wand. It's getting work done. No one walks away from extreme accountability saying, oh, wow, that was so much easier. Now, in the end of it, they're like, I'm so glad I did this. This was life-changing to my personal life. This was life-changing my practice, etc. But it's work that has to get done. It's not a hack for it. It's a stick to make sure you do your work, but it's not a hack back not to do the work. And that's kind of the big thing. I guess we've had several themes on here with the podcast about people just getting to work, right? But this is another one of them, is what is the time dedicated that is just butt in the seat, time to get your crap done, and limit the amount of things that you have to get done, but focus on really crushing those. And then what's the time that's the more strategic time that you set aside? This is, hey, I need to be working on my business versus in my business, which is bigger planning, bigger strategic things in growing your practice.
Yeah, I want to dive a little bit deeper into what it means to work on your business, but there are some specific examples of that. But before we do, you mentioned about being in the seat and grinding it out. And this is where the 2X, and by the way, if you're able to 2X your practice, that is a phenomenal milestone, right? That's a phenomenal milestone to do. So what will be the biggest driver to 2X is that every week you have a lever to pull that moves your practice forward, specifically that moves sales and marketing forward. So we often see advisors that say, hey, my practice isn't growing and it's stagnant and I try really hard and I do all this work. Cool. How many people did you talk to this week? I don't know. Okay, so that number is 0. How many people did you talk to last week? I don't know either. That number is 0. When was the last time you asked someone to become a client? You made them that offer. I don't know. Well, let's pull it up. Oh, it's been 4 months. Now, I'm not beating up on anyone specific because I used to make that mistake. I remember early in my career, I was talking to a business marketing expert who turned out to have no idea what he's talking about. And he says, oh, Jarvis, tell me your numbers. And I'm throwing out these numbers. And I realized that none of the numbers I told him were true. They were just what I wanted them to be in my head. We talk about this a lot, Micah, you and I, about, hey, you've got to actually have the numbers. But every advisor needs, and really every person in your team, to say, hey, every week I'm pulling this lever 5 times. Every week I'm calling 5 centers of influence. Every week I'm recording 5 new podcast episodes. Every week I'm, whatever that case may be, you have to have a lever to pull every week that will move your practice forward and ideally risks you hearing a no.
Yeah, that's what really is going to make the change, right? And every member of your team has something that you need to be doing. So how are you helping hold them accountable? How are you leading by example with this, of leading with your numbers? What are you willing to do that makes you feel uncomfortable moving these things forward? One of the things that, Jarvis, I tell my team as I'm going through this, saying, hey, these are things that I'm not comfortable doing and I'm going to move forward with them. And my team always pauses and they're like, what do you mean you're not comfortable with this? I was like, this is outside my comfort zone, but these are things that I just need to get done and I'm going to do. And they're always blown away with it, right? Because I'm not going to be some drama queen when something is like, you know, outside of my comfort zone with it, but they don't see me in any type of discomfort. So they think that they're alone in the discomfort, that when they have to do something that no one else feels that, you know, uncomfortability. And it's kind of interesting to open it up and say, hey, I'm uncomfortable with this particular activity, but this is something that's required for us to grow and for us to hit our goals. Therefore, I'm going to do it. And it's like, wow, they're not alone.
That's a great point. It's interesting to make your team aware of that. And we have to remember, both for our team, but especially for ourselves, that our brains will push us away from uncomfortable things. It's something strange in our brains, even though we know that this uncomfortable thing will lead us to success, right? By default, our brain will find ways to avoid uncomfortable things, like those telephone calls, like the reaching out to centers of influence, whatever it is, or even these working on your business, right? So here we are in July. Yes. Everybody has their first 6 months numbers through June 30. Going back and looking at those numbers and really looking and saying, hey, every line item of my expenses, where did that go and what value did I get out of it? That's an uncomfortable discussion because you were the one who spent all that money, or at least directly or indirectly, and you have to take accountability and say, hey, I spent X on this thing and there's no ROI here. Like, those are uncomfortable. It's much easier to say, you know what I'll do? I'll go post on LinkedIn and I'll read the latest industry publication and it'll be the end of the year and I'll complain that my practice hasn't grown.
You know, Jarvis, it's so funny when you talk about it, the aspect. One of the things that I like to do in the mid-year review is I like to have someone else put the numbers together for me. Right? Because the comment that you made about years ago when you worked with a marketing person is that you told them the wrong numbers. And you're like, holy crap, why did I do this? Right? Now, I don't feel, no one else does this either. I don't feel like I'm lying to myself with the numbers, but there's things that I am going to mentally remember differently. Right? So I want evidence for all of these things. I go out to Tori and I say, hey, great news. Here's the mid-year review. Here's all the things that I want you to pull. We've been doing this for several years, so she knows what those things are. And I want every single one of those to be backed up by evidence. If she says we met with X amount of prospects, I better be able to click click a link and see every single prospect name. If there's not a name, there was no person. No one came into our office without a name and an appointment date, right? And then did they become clients or not? Again, I should see a contract on all of these people, right? So if I need to spot check, this isn't, oh yeah, they told me yes. No. Did they sign an agreement? Did we get money? Yeah. That's a new client, right? No agreement signed, no new money, then this was not a client. And so, but really holding to those consistent standards so I know what I'm benchmarking against. So I say, oh yeah, well they said yes, but then they're traveling to Europe. And I got those 2 other people that said yes too. But when they come back in town, they're going to sign. So really that's 3 clients that we should be adding to this. Nope, that's not. It's how many do I currently have? And then where am I at? That honest look at that number is so important.
Yeah, it really is. And we fall victim of, like you said, we have to be optimists to survive the brutality of our industry. It's very difficult to do what we do. And so you have to kind of, again, this abundance mindset. Oh, so many people are saying yes to me. Even our morning mantras, which we've talked about on this podcast several times. People say yes to me all the time. I'm a phenomenal financial advisor. And that's a critical thing, but sometimes you believe it too far. So to your example, Mike, you say, oh, I brought in 20 prospects last year. Well, the number was 7, but you told yourself 7, and then you told yourself 10. And to your example, that one guy said yes, he'll probably become a client eventually. What is the actual number? I recently am, guys, going through this exercise. I have a trusted business mentor who's going through my financials line by line, and they're saying, hey, Jarvis, last year you spent X on this thing. And I said, there's not a chance. I spent that much on this thing. There's not a chance. Well, let's look. Let's to your point, Micah. Let's pull it up. Here they are. Here's all the transactions, and this is what we all do. Oh, you know what? Line 37. That's miscategorized. Okay, well that was $2,000 out of 200,000. $2,000. Okay, so we'll pull that one out. So I'm sorry, you didn't spend $200,000 on this last year. You spent $198,000 on this last year. Can we just get that this is a big number? But it was one of those that when I looked at it, avoiding discomfort. Yep, you know what? That's just numbers. It's not a big deal. I'm still making plenty of money. All of those things. It's an easy trap to fall into.
No, that's one benefit if you have a partnership, right? Is you get that accountability. If you have the right partners, you get that accountability that's there. If you don't have the right partners or you don't have a partnership, then this is where masterminds are going to come in, right? Where you're going to have the financial undressing and this transparency of saying, hey, look, here's where all of these things are, and have them go through it. If you need to make a game of it, say, great, then say you got to cut 30% expenses. Find a way to go in someone's books, cut 30% expenses that have no decrease in overall profitability, right? Meaning that the business will continue to grow. We're not going to say, great news, we're going to cut your rent out and fire all your team members, and there's your 30%. Yeah, it's not really what we're going for. But, make a game of it and say, how would you have to do that? And granted, you may not do all of the changes to get that 30%, but you probably could do a lot of them. And then that's a lot of money. And not only just the money side, Jarvis, that's a lot of wasted time that you are playing office and these other things which aren't being productive. Where are we doing that?
Yeah, I always tell clients, Micah, when I'm meeting with them, I always say it's very difficult, if not impossible, to be objective about your own money. Yeah. Excuse me. And the same is true for your own practice. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to be objective about your own practice. Now, some of us are a little better at it than others, and it's reflected in our success. But at the end of the day, we all need someone to be objective. Mike, you and I always joke, like, hey, just tell me your problem, because I can't solve my problem. Tell me your problem. I've got a solution for you. And we joke about that, but it's really the truth. It's like, hey, I got this thing in my practice. Hey, the solution's pretty obvious. Doesn't work the same in my practice, by the way, right? Like, let's just change this in yours. But you've got to have that objectivity. Now, if you meet someone online dating like Micah and I did clear back on the Kitsis podcast in 2017 that you can do this with, that's awesome. If you don't, again, that's why we created the Invictus coaching program, because so many advisors came to us and said, hey, I don't have a mastermind group. I don't have someone that I trust. In fact, Mike had a recent mastermind. We had a new member there, and he said, I have never shared these numbers with anyone ever. Right. Not with my spouse, not even with my accountant, not with my banker. I keep everything kind of segmented. I have never shared this with anyone ever. Very successful advisor, very financially successful. It wasn't like he was hiding, crazy offshore debts or something like this. He just never showed anybody. And so it was a time to step back and say, all right, let's peel back the layers on this thing together.
Jarvis, as we talk about this and talking about how you cannot be, honest really with yourself on your previous finances, I talked to clients about this, and this is the reason we don't do budgeting. I said, the issue with budgeting is you've already justified all of the expenses. Why do I know that? Because you agreed to purchase them. And when you made that transaction, you justified that expense, right? And why would I go back and look at the last 60, 90, 120 days, et cetera, and have you re-justify all of your spending? What progress am I going to make with that? The only thing that counts is what we can do moving forward. So that would be the same with this exercise, right? It's kind of fun to grill someone else hold them over the coals a little bit to say where they spent their money. But the really goal of this exercise is going forward with it. What changes can they make now to make sure they don't repeat those habits?
Yeah, that's so true. And it's easy to get caught in this habit of, well, we've always done it this way. Or to your point, Micah, spend a lot of time beating ourselves up over what has been. Oh, you know what? I should have changed this. Or, you know what? 3 years ago, my practice. No. As you like to say, my time machine is broken, right? So, all right, we know where you're at. We've established that. What are we going to change? What dramatic changes are we going to make? What lever are we going to pull every single week that's going to get you to the 2X? And eventually, maybe that'll get you to 10X. I don't know. But let's get you to 2X first, and then we can talk about 10X.
I love it. Well, speaking of growth, Jarvis's podcast is all about action items. So what action items should our listeners take this week to help improve their practice?
Yeah, I would say a lever that if you pulled every single week would get you dramatically closer to a 2X is if you blocked out an hour a week and you picked one item in each of these three categories. You picked one item to eliminate, one item to automate, and one item or task to delegate, right? And so you really just sit back, you turn off your computer, you sit back, you have a piece of paper, and you say, all right, great. What's something we can eliminate from our practice? What's something we can automate? What's something we can delegate, either myself or a member of the team? Actually, Micah, as we were recording this episode, I wrote down a couple of things I'm going to talk to my team about tomorrow that I thought, you know what? That needs to either be automated or eliminated, and let's put a forcing mechanism behind it.
I love it. I'm going to say the second thing is you haven't done it already. It's time to do your mid-year review. Yes. Schedule a time on your calendar. You should have a formal process to go through this so it's not just you playing Office for an hour and a half. If you don't have that, then we have that inside of the Backstage Pass as in our Invictus members as well on that format that you should go through in making sure that you're making the most of it. But again, 6 months under your belt, you got 6 months in front of you. What changes are you going to make sure you're crushing 2023?
I love it. Last action item on my list, if you haven't signed up already, the Retirement Tax Services Tax Summit is this fall in September in my hometown of Las Vegas. And of course, for our Invictus members, we'll be getting together prior to that conference, and the team can get you details on that. But if you're really looking for tangible ways to up your tax game, not some hypothetical realm, but to really hear from advisors, what exactly are they doing in their practice on a daily basis to deliver tax value, this will be a great thing to attend.
Awesome. Jarvis, this is always a great time. I really appreciate us taking the time and making this podcast. It makes a huge change in my practice, and I know it does in all of our listeners. So until next time, happy planning.
Happy planning.
Information designed to change lives. Financial planning can make you thrive. Start today, don't think twice.